Welcome to the Civic Brief with Dr. Isaiah Ike Wilson III, where complex issues meet everyday lives. Now, let's begin.
Fellow travelers, welcome back to the Civic Brief. And again, I'm Ike Wilson. Today I want to pose a question many avoid, frankly, I think because it cuts too sharply through our own self-made illusions. Here's that question. What if Jesus walked among us in America today? Not as a metaphor, not as a Sunday school memory, but as a living, breathing figure moving through our streets, our cities, our encampments, our detention centers, our rallies, even our legislatures. Heck, would we recognize him? Would we resist him? Would we try to use him? And who would fear him? Let's explore that question through the civic lens and then turn towards a more concrete policy-ready blueprint for renewing the republic and doing so with the church as a vital civic partner. So then, if Jesus walked today, I believe he'd enter a nation built on a wise constitutional insight. And this is where I want us to revisit that establishment clause, right, to our Constitution. That constitutional insight, that wise constitutional insight is this, that faith must be free, but faith must never rule. Both of those things. That insight matters because Jesus consistently refused to be used by political power. He walked away from crowds who wanted to crown him. He confronted religious leaders who aligned themselves with imperial authority. He insisted that Caesar's sphere is not God's sphere, but also that God's sphere includes every human being Caesar harms. Now, in today's America, Jesus would likely expose the hypocrisy of all of us, and certainly of both political tribes. The ones who wrap power in scripture, as well as the ones who treat the poor as a political inconvenience. I believe he'd remind us that the gospel is not a partisan platform, but it has political consequences whenever and wherever vulnerability is threatened. Now imagine Jesus under America First 3.0, in an era of intensified deportations, forced removals, rising autocracy, and the political stoking of fear. Where would he be? I believe he'd be at migrant intake sites. He'd be in food pantry lines, with the homeless under highway bridges. He'd be with teens caught between despair and fentanyl. He'd be with those families crushed by medical debt. And yes, he'd also be standing unarmed between armed men and unarmed people, just as clergy did in the photos we have running through this episode. And what might he say? Probably the same thing he said in first century Palestine. Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. Woe to those who devour widows' houses. Put your sword back in its place. He'd confront illiberalism, not as a pundit, but as a protector of human dignity. Now, for the second half of this episode, today's episode, I want to shift a bit from this imagination to real practical, real-world implementation. Here's a compound security blueprint. Let's call it a civic playbook for renewing the republic, again, with the church as a key partner. I'm going to give us a 5-point plan, 5-point blueprint. First, parish city compacts. Faith communities partnering with municipalities to coordinate things like shelters, emergency heat and cold responses, refugee intake, neighborhood peace teams, as well as rumor control networks during crises. Secondly, we might look to moral supply change and making supply chains more moral. Churches helping build systems of care, food, medicine, legal aid that reduce the strain on public order. Thirdly, we might aim to create election season peace infrastructures. Churches becoming trusted hubs for de-escalation, misinformation verification, volunteer protection, calm space sanctuaries during all that unrest. Fourthly, we might look to create what I'm going to call civic vocations initiatives, teaching young adults how to integrate moral courage with public service outside partisan capture. Let me say that last part again. Outside partisan capture. And then fifthly, let's look and maybe we could aim to build and blueprint what I'll call the Faith in Artificial Intelligence Consortium. Churches, technologists, civic leaders, ethicists, building in those guardrails that we oftentimes talk about on the Civic Brief. In this context, things like human dignity and automation, bias mitigation, algorithmic justice, as well as spiritual resilience in the age of machine intelligence. Now, if Jesus walked America today, I believe this is the work he would call all of us to do. Not purity politics, not cultural warfare, but building a humane society that protects the vulnerable and restrains the violence. Thanks for traveling with me in this episode of What If Jesus Walked in America Today. Thanks for joining us on the Civic Brief for Nation Not Self.
Thanks for tuning into the Civic Brief. Got questions, insights, or ideas? Join us at thecivicbrief.com to continue the dialogue. Subscribe, share, and be part of shaping the future, one brief at a time.